Sometimes you get amps in that may or may not be worth repairing. This is an Ampeg Reverberocket reissue. Notice the tiny little pot shafts, missing knobs. And in good condition, the handle's about to break, these go for between $250 and $500 used. This one is not in good condition. So let's see how much repair it needs and whether it's justified. All right, this amp's chassis is held to the cabinet by 4 screws. This one is non-original and not making good contact. This one's bent. This one's missing. This one seems okay. We get some better lighting. We'll take a look inside. The problem description says, pinging, static, cuts out, could just be a tube. Please diagnose and refresh what needs, what needs it, refresh what needs it, loose pots, etc. Reverb is weak. Please call customer with any questions. All right, if it wasn't clear earlier, missing the nut hardware here. I'll check, that could be a bad solder joint at the chassis at this point. All these PCB mounted pots could be suspect, and there's just so much yuck up there. Pretty typical construction for the era of Ampeg. Main board, grounds made with these little bits of wire to chassis. Those often break beneath on Ampegs and other things from St. Louis music of the era, such as crates. I'm not seeing any bulging on the filter caps. It doesn't mean that they're still good all these years later. The preamp tubes don't have any visible issues. It'll be microphonic. Can't really see the power tubes yet because it's got this cage, which I'll remove if necessary. First thing I'll do on this, I do it on all amps. I don't show it in every video, because if I show it in every video, then that's a good 3 minutes of every video that's the same. But I measure the DC present, if any, in the amp, and there is none. So I can poke around inside without worrying about getting electrocuted. And if I power it on and then I power it off again, I do the same thing to verify. It just, if I put that in every video has got big chunks that are the same and people tune out. The only thing I see, well, other than this used to have a bunch of wire snips, which are, wire zip ties, which are missing. I can tell by the impressions on the wires. Someone's been in here. This resistor has been changed or messed with. There was some missing silicone here, and the very end of that resistor doesn't look its best. I measure it just to see what it is. And as to the weak reverb, that may be the tank, maybe the op-amp circuitry driving it. We'll check all that stuff. All right, it's a 470 ohm resistor. Probably be better mounted a bit off the board, but we'll see if there's any woes. And I bet these pots are going to make lots of noise when I turn them up. This one's definitely loose. Let's see if I can get this one off without hurting. Yeah, let me show you what I'm talking about. As I lift this knob up, I can see that the nut beneath is loose. That secures the pot to the chassis. And the entire shaft is moving instead of the pot coming off. This is a press-on knob. So I'm going to use this tool to go in here and try to tighten this nut beneath it. Let's see if I can have it the right orientation for that. I don't know if you can see that nut is totally off the chassis. I must get in there with a little screwdriver first to see if I can do it back this way. Oh, it's frozen. So I'm afraid if I pull this knob off, it'll break. I think this is the orientation to tighten this way. Let's see. If I can get it started, maybe I can do it some more with a screwdriver. It's not just a knob puller, it's also a nut tightener. So I don't have a lot of room here to maneuver. No, it's just on there really good. Let's see if I can pull it up. All right. From that pop, it had some glue on it. You can see that nut is not on the shaft 90. It's not perpendicular, so it's messed up in the vernacular. Let's see, that's 11 millimeters. That looks like a 10 millimeter. 3/8 is gonna be too big. No, it's 3/8. I lost that a bit. Hopefully the thread's not too messed up. The pot feels pretty loose, and it's definitely, oh, it's totally undone inside. The clamps inside that keep the pot casing together have totally given way. So I'm gonna have to remove this board to get to that. So that means that a bunch of stuff is gonna need to come up. To pull this board out, I need to disconnect a lot of these things here. Got to take the nut off for this switch. What does that switch say? Channel select. Well, I guess I can just disconnect the quick connects on that. So it's not too bad. Looks like the quick connects. So it's just from this point to the right that all that needs to come off, and it needs to do that to be cleaned anyway. So I'm gonna get the rest of these knobs off, and the nuts on the jacks, and then we'll see about getting this board flipped out so we can look at the solder joints. I'm sure that this one's all messed up. I know the pot casing's messed up, and I bet some of these input and foot switch and loop jacks could use some work. So let's get to that point. Bonus fun, this dress washer was installed upside down. How does one even do that? It's pretty chewed up, but it looks like a cliff, so I've got those. Well, that actually wasn't too bad. Let's see if this will reach to crimp up these loose pot shells. I need to get my needle nose for this next bit. Is the stress from not having a tight connection to the panel was just pulling these pots apart. That's better. As far as solder joints go, these two have minor cracks, and I'm going to reflow the inputs. This one needs to be cleaned, something fierce, but that's no big shock. So the first thing I'm going to do is flush it out this way. Try to get some of that dust out of the end. Let me get my stuff. I'll clean the contacts on the jack too, which are different, but just trying to get some of the major yuck out of here. I'm going to have to flip this in such a way that I can get some salt, the deoxit inside the pots as well. First, I'm just going to reflow some things. Now if this were a more modern amp, more recent production, it would all be lead-free solder, and I would have to remove the old solder before adding new. But this is an older amp, probably from the 90s, and I can just add fresh leaded solder to its existing leaded solder, and the world is a nicer place for it. Making sure that they're seated on the board well. I'll get the flux that I'm adding off the board before I button it up. Do the same to the input jacks. Those can have stresses inside the solder joint that aren't visible from the outside. Plugging and unplugging, and people pulling cables, tripping over them. And I'm going to go through the entire amp and see if I see any other untrustworthy solder joints. I'll do that in a minute. Let's see about cleaning the contacts on those jacks and on these two pots, and that'll show you the premise, and I'll do the rest off camera. Also want to make sure that over here where those ground connections to chassis are made, that those have good solder joints. I see a little bitty cracks there because they get stressed. It's hard to show. But the way to clean these jacks is to plug something into them, which opens up the shunts. Then just a tiny little bit right there where the contacts are made. Now, sometimes there'll be a layer of yuck inside, and you gotta spray a bunch from that direction and just let it all drip out. But I think we're probably gonna be okay like this. This pot's a little bit of a trickier proposition in that it doesn't have an opening per se. I'll have to go at a bit of a strange angle. I can't really demonstrate, but I just want to get a little bit dribble in there. Let gravity be my friend. This shell feels loose too. Yeah, I can see it wobble. Can you see that? So I need to triple check all the pot shells. Oh, I see what's happening. The wafer is broken. This wafer is broken in half. This pot needs to be replaced. Oh, crap. All right, well, let me look at all the other wafers. The others seem okay. What value is this pot? It's a 250K audio taper pot. So I'm going to go check my suppliers and see if I can get this. I might be able to get it from Flip Tops, maybe some other vendors. If I can get this pot, it will be very cheap. The issue is no one uses this pot except Ampeg, and I think PV used something similar at the time. Worst comes to worst, I put in a modern 16 millimeter, and we just don't have a perfectly matching knob. But let's see if I can get the exact part first. Because once that wafer cracks, it's game over for that little cheap thing. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, searched all my suppliers. Searched Reverb, searched eBay. This pot is not available anywhere. It is still miraculously working, but it can't really be tightened. I'm going to try super glue on this. I mean, I could drill out for a larger shaft, the larger diameter shaft pot and put a 16 millimeter alpha in, but I'm trying to keep the repair bill low because this amp honestly is not worth a huge investment. And I don't know if what else might be wrong with this amp. I knew that these pots were suspicious, the solder joints were suspicious. I wanted to take a look and see. There may be other things wrong with this, so I'm not going to volunteer the owner for a big expense on this only to find something else is wrong. I'll show you two other things. I'm going to do the super glue here after I clamp this just a little bit more. Hopefully it'll buy some time with this pot. I'll show you one other thing I'm going to do before I call the owner. All right, I got some super glue in there, and that my Hail Mary is that it will only make the wafer stick to itself and won't make the pot seize up. I have not much control over this. I don't want to take the whole thing apart and separate it because, again, labor adds up. So that's a Hail Mary. Let's let that dry. We'll see where we're at. I'll show you one other thing that, if nothing else, will show you how to do this on your own apps. And I should mention that all that pot damage is because everything was allowed to become loose because this amp was neglected. But anyway, let's clean this off. This applies to the PV Classic series and Hot Rods and Blues Juniors and these Ampegs, everything with a chrome faceplate. This stuff loves to get dirty and corrode, and a lot of solvents will remove the lettering. So I'm just getting here and roughing up the big dirty spots, making a bunch of dust. Then I'm going to hit it with some WD-40, making sure it doesn't drip down into the electronics area. Just going to move it around with my finger. Let it sit for a little bit. This will remove most of the grunge after it sits without any real friction being necessary and without affecting the silk screen. And so when an amp comes in that's this filthy, it means that the amp has been neglected, and I expect to find horrible things waiting for me inside. It's not a shock to me that that pot may be DOA, because it never stood a chance. I'll let that sit for a second, then I'll wipe up the excess and see where we're at. All right, given that I don't know if this amp's going to work, I don't want to spend any more time on this. I could get it perfect. This is enough better that I feel better sending it back if everything else works. But if you have an amp like this, a little patience in WD-40 will clean a chrome panel very nicely without affecting the silk screen. There are solvents which work faster, but you always have the risk of lifting the silk screen. So So far, the volume pot that I super glued is still turning, and it has a lot less wobble to it. I'm going to give it about another hour to set up before I put it back in place, because it's a real tight squeeze to get this board in and out, and you have to flex the pot a little bit to do that. And I don't want to break the still setting up super glue. I didn't use the fast acting kind with the activating thing because I was lazy and I have other things I have to do at the same time as this. This is not the only thing I have going. This is just the one that's on camera. So I'll let this pot sit up a bit longer, this one right here, before I force it back in place. But I'm confident, at least in the solder joints, and we'll see where we're at once it's all back together. All right, the board's back in. I don't have the jack nuts all back on, but all these nuts are tight, and they're all perpendicular to the shaft. This one is no longer floating up, and the bushing was not damaged. So I've got this one set at 2, at 2, at 5, at 5, at 5, at 5, reverb off, and all the stuff below is reconnected and the grounds are done. The reverb tank is connected. I have no idea whether it works. It's loose in the bag down there. It said weak reverb. Probably going to have a problem with that tank. We'll check. Power it on. And I'm hearing a relay quit, but I'm not getting any power indication. I'm going to power it on. I'm going to measure where that connects and see if we have AC at that point, or maybe DC. I don't know how they did the lamp on this. The tubes are glowing though, so the amp is on, even though the indicator is not indicating. Let's see, do we have AC there? 6.8 volts AC going to the bulb. Bulb must be dead, and it's just stubborn. I use my same tool to loosen it. That same corrosion that we got off of all this is on this, so it doesn't want to turn. There it goes. Pretty sure we're going to find a dead bulb in there. And the entire indicator is a little bit loose. That's good. Yeah, that's just a dead bulb. More of that yuck from a liquid spill. Power the amp off, get that bulb out. Let me show you a trick to getting bulbs out. You can push it down and turn it counterclockwise sometimes. No problem, but getting it out can be tricky. Take a little bit of tape. Sometimes that's your friend. Dead bulb, I'll put in a fresh one later, but I know that we have a heater supply working. So I'll let that come up. And I've got on my current limiter. While that's coming up, I'm going to plug something into the guitar input. Bring the guitar closer to me and make sure its volume is off for the first power on. Take it out of standby and watch my current limiter. No issues with that. Tap on tubes. So far, so good. Let's see if it changes channels. All right, that's all good. Let's see if we have guitar when I play through it. Now, this is with the current limiter, and we still have 6.8 volts AC on the heaters, so that's pretty high. Should be artificially low on that. That gain pot is the one that I super glued. And I cleaned it, but it could probably use another cleaning. I'll see if I can make that happen. There's a buzz at highest gain settings. And probably the preamp tube. We'll revisit that. Go back to the clean setting. That pot, which is the one that was disconnected up top and was falling apart, is working well now that's been tightened. Let's check it on the treble, mids, bass. That's good. The master. That's all good. Let's see if the master affects the clean. All right, the master is just for the drive. That's good. I'm gonna turn it down for right now. Let's check the reverb. Well, the reverb is not weak, as the owner feared, and I think that's probably just because I reflowed some connections, including the reverb connections there and the reverb pot connections. So I think the owner is getting very lucky on this. I've not checked the bias, and my playing sucks right now because of this. I will check the bias. Pretty sure we got a noisy tube in V1. Let's go back to the high gain stuff. That's not too bad for this price point. I think, honestly, the owner is just going to have, I'll try to clean it one more time. But even if that continues, you know, rather than try to replace the pot made of unobtainium or drill out for a larger pot, that's not too bad to live with, because once it's set to a place, it's fine. Let's try a different tube, see if we can get rid of that buzzy noise. I'll put it in standby just because it bugs people when I hot swap tubes. You have to know which tubes you can and cannot hot swap. It may just be a dirty socket. This is a tongue saw. Let's put in a different tube just to see. Let's see what I have handy. Here's an RCA. If we have issues with this in the amp, there's a problem with the amp. If the issues, if it's fine with this, then it's a problem with that tongue saw. So let's see. Trying to line it up right. Oh, I got a bent pin on this. Let me straighten that out first. That's just a matter of nudging it with the fingernail very carefully and getting it to line up right. There we go. Let's bring that out of standby. Let that warm up just a little bit. All right, that buzz is gone. So it may be that tongue saw. It may be that that tube socket was a little bit dirty, and changing the tube out cleaned that. I'm not going to send this out with an RCA in it. I only have so many RCAs, and at the end of the day, it is, in fact, a rather inexpensive St. Louis music era Ampeg. But I am going to clean the tube sockets on this tongue saw real fast before I put it back in, just in case it was a little layer of corrosion that had built up over the years. With everything else in this amp, that would not surprise me. Let's put that tongue saw back in and see if that buzz returns. If so, we'll see what else we got handy. All right, that buzzing is gone. So it was just a matter of cleaning the tube sockets a little bit. That's good. I need to verify the bias. And I hear some glass rattling. I suspect it's the output tube. Yes, the output tubes. Given the low value of this amp and the high cost of 6L6s right now at the moment of filming this video in April of 2022, I'm going to tell the guy, live with it until the market gets less crazy. We'll change those out later for something that doesn't have any rattle, but they're working, and just watch your volume until then. I've got to replace some hardware on this. I'm not sure. I think I might be able to fit some PV knobs to replace the missing original Ampeg knobs. I will know more soon, but I think the amp's probably pretty healthy. I'm going to take it off the current limiter. Definitely not a weak reverb anymore. So that's all pretty good. I want to check the heater voltage now that all the tubes are up and it's off the current limiter. We've got a 120 and 121 is fluctuating at the wall, so that's pretty typical for Memphis on a good day. And the heater voltage is at 7 volts AC. So yeah, that's way too high. If this were a vintage amp, I'd be very worried about that as far as the tube's longevity. Realistically, with this amp, unless you already own a Variac or a brown box or some other way to lower the voltage going into the amp, it's not really worth worrying about that much as far as spending money on it. But it is a flaw of the amp's design, in my opinion. Let's see what the supply at the op amps is. Let's see, pin 4, what is that for? 4. Negative 15.83, pin 8, 15.85. So seems good on the op amp rail. I think the owner is going to be very lucky on this. I'm going to clean the nuts and washers and knobs and put in a different lamp bulb. And I think I've got a cliff that'll match this. I'm going to clean up those knobs. I think I've got some PVs that have that small diameter center. If not, I'll see what our options are. I think we got very lucky with this pot here. That remaining little bit of noise, I'll clean it one more time, like I said, but if we're stuck with that, that's acceptable, in my opinion. So I think the owner is going to be very happy. And I keep saying that, so I'm repeating myself. I should stop here. Actually, 2 more things to show before I stop. New bulb, pretty blue lights working. That's great. This nut here, which is at an angle, is a nut that was welded to the chassis and it is broken off. And so this screw just turns freely. You can't tighten it. You can't really remove it. The fix for that is actually to get in there with some JB Weld epoxy and just get it all over the nut and the chassis, but not the bolt, and wait for it to tighten up, to set up, and then you can tighten this, and it should hold well enough. The 3 other screws are okay as far as the nuts. They seem to be, though the top ones are kind of ugly because they don't have dress nuts. But, it's functional. And I'm not going to spend any more of the client's money on things like that. But if he wants to go to Home Depot and get some JB Weld and put a little ring of it around that nut without touching the screw, it would make the thing more secure. You got to choose your battles in this price range.